Hear me? Oh, this works. Hey, so very nice to be here. I'm David Helgason. I'm one of the Unity guys, and they asked me to come and speak about mobile and sort of try to figure out something interesting there. And there's a lot of interesting things to say about mobile, and a lot of interesting things have been said about mobile. So I'm kind of going to speak from kind of my perspective and sort of talk about the things that I think are interesting and that matter to people who build mobile games. And the first thing that I think is noteworthy about mobile is, why is there so much energy? You can just feel the intensity of everything that has to do with mobile. And you can feel it, whether you have an app on any marketplace, or just by being a developer, and you go to any little developer meetup, you realize that you're not just there with your friends, but that this meetup of game developers, based on game developers, is also being attended by BlackBerry and by Tapjoy and all these guys, and you might sort of wonder why that is. I've been wondering that myself. I mean, obviously you can see things like the very big numbers and the high growth and that kind of stuff, but there's a little bit more to it. By the way, I'll talk about more things after this. If you were at my talk on Tuesday at the Unite Nordic, which is my company's conference in the same location a few days ago, a few slides will be the same, but I promise only a few. So the very sort of top level of smartphones, the smartphone explosion. To put it a little bit in perspective, I was thinking about how that compares to the PC explosion, which happened later. The Apple I was the PC, so it might be confusing for a second, but it'll become clear. The Apple I was made in 200 copies, more or less, and the two Steves were selling them to their friends. And it came out in '76, and the PC industry kind of created, so many companies and so many things happened, and then it came to a standstill. And the standstill happened last year, or actually it happened during the winter of 2011 and 2012, which is the moment in time when the most PCs were sold ever, and now that's dropping, and it'll keep dropping. And it'll never get back to that number unless we, meet another civilization on another planet or something. And we got basically from 200, units to 1.5 billion installed in the world. That number is not dropping because, just because they sell fewer PCs, there's not a lot of them installed. But it's basically stagnant now, and this took 36 years. So if you look at the smartphone, the first smartphone, depending on how generous you want to be to our sponsors and Nokia and others, you might argue that the first smartphones were coming out in 2003. Other people might argue it was as late as 2008 when the App Store opened up on the iPhone. But in that range is, I think, a reasonable estimate. And now we're at 1.5 billion installed units, and this took us just a handful of years, between 5 and 10 years, and soon, very soon. We'll have 6 billion units, and the whole time will have been 15 years, which is half the time. So if you just do some very simplistic math, we're going to 4 times more units, and over half the time, that's a growth rate that is 8 times higher. And pretty much right now we're entering. Well, any technology adoption follows an S-curve. When you're starting out, it looks like a hockey stick, and then everything has to come to an end because there's a limited number of people on the planet, and that is called the S-curve, and we're entering the steepest part of that S-curve right now. So of course, everyone who's smart and has money or has products is intensely focused on this period in particular, because this is where the most difference will be made, and this was where the biggest companies will be created and all this stuff. So that's why, very simplistically, why indie developers and all the developers are being hounded by companies that want to work with them and so on. Well, there's a bit more to it though. You know, there's just devices, well, how the revenue's doing, and you see numbers like this, but I still think it's telling, you know, that when the App Store opens this iOS, this is data gathered by us. This is not public data, but we feel very confident about these numbers being within a reasonable range. They're not exact. You know, it was clear that in 2008, you know, a few games were making $1 million. That was the first year of the App Store. The following year, we heard of games that were making several $1 million, and then it just came rapid 15, around 30, around 80 last year, and now, you know, this is actually the 2013 estimate is being called extremely conservative by people. It's probably going to be way higher, that's the top grossing game, or handful of games, so that's not representative of everything, but of course it speaks to the opportunity. What is also amazing is that if there was a line underneath with the development cost of these games, it has gone up, but it seems to be sort of trapping, well, it's following a very different curve. So you know, the top games now are being developed for $1 million, $1.5 million. There are more expensive games that don't necessarily perform so well, but this seems to be the range we're in, which is of course amazing. Another trend, and we'll sort of come back to thinking about it in a second, is you know, who is making these successful games, and you know, if you look at the statistics of engagement of different of games by independent developers and you know, the category called established developers. It's always been more engagement by the indie games. This is by Sessions, data from Flurry. There was actually a bit of a swing down. Like, it seems that indie developers were losing out in the engagement, which is not always the same as money, of course, but another important metric. But it seems to have swung back, and we don't have fresh data on this, but the sense is definitely that it's at least not getting much worse, and it's a fantastic state we're in. The other way of looking at it is by revenue, where, you know, top 25 games, top 100 games, and the rest, you know, where the amount of revenue generated by the top seems to have shrunk. It's very extreme, by the way. It's, you know, these ridiculous numbers, but in aggregate, it's actually shrunk percentage-wise. That of course means, again, you know, it's a surprisingly fat tail, and there are many sort of difficult trends in user acquisition and being found, and it's not that it's easy, but the opportunities, according to the data, are still very much there. At the same time as, you know, there's this kind of circle of people that want to bring in money and partnerships into the space. Now, this, you might say, are two different reasons why, you know, why there's so much energy here. There's a third reason, and I've been thinking about this, and I couldn't figure it out, but I ran into a guy, this by the way speaks to how young our industry is. I ran into the guy who almost practically created the industry, a guy called Nolan Bushnell, who created Atari. And, you know, it's not that old, he's actually running a company and you know, still doing stuff. What he was talking about in this particular conversation was how, you know, entertainment changes over time, and how, you know, he called it that, and all entertainment, it's not just games, but all types of entertainment follows what he calls an innovation cycle, where, you know, things, you know, are fresh for a while and then they're not fresh anymore, and then there's something new. And that's how this innovation cycle kind of defines the half-life of the medium, whereby, you know, old stuff starts looking old. You know, then you mentioned music, which is, you know, a category of entertainment or art or how you will. And music, you know, has a long shelf life. So, you know, some music we still love after 100 years. You might argue there's music we love after, you know, hundreds of years. Some music starts sounding a bit dated after 10 years. I think, you know, well, I'm not going to offend anyone, but there's definitely some types of music that come up quickly and they go away. But even, you know, they're pretty good for, I think, a nice estimate is 10 years. So you might say the half-life of music is 10 to 100 years. It's extremely rough and simplistic, but in context, I think it's valid. Because then you look at film, where of course we love some old films still, but it's actually a fairly small library. Films, some action films look very fresh for a few years, but then after 5 years they start looking kind of dated. And a lot of films start looking dated after 10 years. Maybe I was a bit aggressive, maybe it should be 15 years. But independent of that, the shelf life of film is clearly much shorter than music. Then, when it comes to sort of traditional games, let's call them, large games of various sorts on various platforms, I think most people that I've checked with seem to agree that few games look dated in less than 2 years, and a lot of games, or maybe even most games, look dated after 3 years. Again, it doesn't mean that there aren't old brands we like. It doesn't mean that there isn't an old library that we can love. But from a consumption perspective and what's really kind of being actually played, it follows that kind of curve, which is a pretty rapid follow-up. Now, when it comes to smartphone games and mobile games broadly, the decay is staggeringly fast. I think it's an opinion of mine, but I feel that some games after 6 months they feel old. By the way, I'm not just speaking about the graphics. It's everything. It's how you interact. It's the controls. It's how social things are implemented. It's how the business models are. How you present the player with requests for money and all this stuff. I can't think of many mobile games that feel fresh after a year and a half. So it's a very, very short cycle. That's of course very scary for people who are building them, because you build them and they're kind of, before they're really out there being outdated, and then soon they're dead. Not as works hard, it's not something you can be proud of, but there's something that's valid in the market and keeping your studios alive. Of course you can make a number 2, and IP and brands follow a different cycle, which is has a very different timeline, although these also decay. Mickey Mouse lived for a long time, but now he's pretty much dead, and so on and so forth. So while it's scary and kind of overwhelming, I think, to think of, it also means that whoever publishes these games, whoever wants them on their platforms, they have to meet you every year. So if you're making good games, and again extremely competitive, these guys will have to find you and work with you every year. So even if you actually make a misstep, next year they'll still have to come back and get another game from you. And even if you create a fantastic hit for them, they'll still have to come back. And I think that's the last kind of piece to this, why there's so much energy. Because when you sort of sum it up, is that the shorter half-life of a medium is the more. And you can actually see it in the music industry, where the labels hold all the power. I mean, now they're also more or less dead, but that's for other reasons. Because if you own a big library of old music, you have Beatles in there and other stuff, then basically the guy with the guitar is competing with that whole library. That's a tough one. So that's at least what is creating these incredible opportunities. So first, then it's the point that really I want to talk about is small teams. Whereas there's format factors that mean that small teams are useful or required. There's velocity of innovation, all kinds of reasons why they're important. But in games, games are almost just a special case of a much broader trend in technology, where if you look at the value created by small teams now versus 10 years ago, versus 20 years ago, versus 30 years ago, it's going up. Like, smaller teams create more value, and of course with leveraging, and we're getting better and better at building on top of each other, and there's game engines and technologies and platforms that you can build up, so you can have these incredibly leveraged small teams that can build amazing things. Outsource some of the art, get pieces. It's not easy, but it's all doable. And that means that with incredibly little funding, these things get created. At staggering scale. It's kind of easy to forget that Rovio was handful of people. Well, there were 20 probably when they created the game, and even something like Clash of Clans was supposed to be done by around 10 people, and all this. So there's really no kind of barrier there. If you can find 5 to 10 people to put in a room, there's no real barrier, which is of course really, really amazing. And increasing the velocity and since there are so many people that are kind of surrounding this room, kind of really hungry people who want to find what's in this room, the opportunities for clever and social people are really amazing. The next thing that's happening, I think, is important and also changed, from just a couple of years ago is kind of the importance of multi-platformness and how because there's so ridiculously much value, there are so many people that have devices that are pushing them into the market, small players, big players, etc. There's a whole range of considerations to make there, to do that people who are smart about it can really get funding for their projects and build up this, build up their work by cleverly navigating the different platforms and different deals and getting tools that are multi-platform and so on. I'm trying to avoid some of my stuff, but it's pretty good. There's just a few considerations that we sort of remind ourselves of, and we put up a blog post about this recently, just kind of walking through these things. Where the first thing, first important platform consideration is form factor and versus your game, of course, and demographic. Whether it's which devices have any kind of match, and of course avoiding these that don't. It's a pretty intuitive decision to a large degree, I think. Well, maybe not demographic, but yeah, kind of actually. Well, maybe an intuition informed by reading a lot of technology news and then kind of consuming that. And then the next one is is this financially sound and big sort of threat of obsolescence entering the platform too late or at the wrong time. It kind of requires a bit of financial modeling, and there's been talks and will be talks about some of that, how to make these decisions. On a really broad scale, it's there's too many things, and whatever could be said even in a session like this would be outdated in half a year. But that's also something to worry about, of course. And then just on a very practical level, when you know that you probably should, or at least be ready to have a multi-platform game, then start considering the most divergent platforms that you might consider, because then the work you do will sort of stretch across if it's a relatively high-end platform, a low-end platform, or a very big screen and a very small screen, things like that. If you basically start producing for both of them, you kind of make the most flexible of productions. And of course, tactical things like abstracting out the sort of details of the platform and using third-party plugins. And there's innumerable companies that will help you out with different, all the different kind of components you need, and a nice aftermarket around any game engine there is. And then what we call sort of resolution robustness, because at this point, if you're multi-platform, you can pretty much assume that you cannot track down every single resolution. So you also have to kind of consider the most widescreen, but to the least widescreen, probably a square at some point. And just actually test on these most extreme things and kind of trust that you'll be fine based on that. So it's a shit ton of work, by the way, but there's tools that help with that. And then because again you don't know which resolution you're going to be on, and resolutions change also shockingly sometimes with well, that was a couple of years ago with Retina. We'll see what the next one holds, but people are expecting some kind of crazy resolutions coming up soon. So actually basically it means that all source art should be really high resolution, kind of unreasonably high resolution. We knew a lot of game developers that had built the exact right resolution for the previous resolution phones, and these were kind of screwed. We very quickly got updated with the new phones, which really sucks. And then breaking almost all the rules of software engineering, you know, to optimize early, to actually start, you know, stress testing, you know, how many characters can you have on the screen and things like that. And then, you know, once you've kind of optimized that problem, then you start making the full game. Which, I think it was probably the extra band that in software engineering, but in games, and in particular mobile, it's kind of the most important thing, I think. So that's that. Then another topic that I think is important is, and which is rarely spoken of, is that just kind of one thing matters. And how do I think of that? It's that, and this goes for any product design, I think, but games, more than any other, I think, is that, you know, if you think of all the things you can do, whether it's, you know, the graphics or the controls and all different elements of the game, what your game will be judged by only, really, is the highest point, the best thing in the game. And then the rest that you build is just kind of to support so that it's not a total failure after people fall in love with that one thing. It is a simplification, but I really believe this is true for anything you build. It's this kind of one outstanding thing that makes people you know, love it with a passion and need it. And also, if you look back at the most successful games, they all have this kind of one outstanding thing. You know, CSI Racing was pretty, I'm gonna offend somebody, but it was kind of a crappy racing game. But it had these amazingly lush graphics. Right? Then they did a lot of other things really well. But that was kind of the one thing that made, you know, made people download it at terrifying rates, and so on. So from that, you can actually follow this kind of also, you know, make a logical deduction of the next element, which is you to challenge yourself. And again, like, and it's been in my life, it's been in, you know, Unity as a company's life, and in the lives of a lot of my friends and people I know, is that whenever they did something really hard and you know, solved some incredibly tough problem, that was almost always the thing that kind of made them successful. And whether it's, you know, very, very tough gameplay problem or AI problem, or, you know, in our case, you know, I'm not going to tell stories like that. But big Q&A afterwards. Yeah, it's such a, you know, once you realize this, the next thing is just such a logical deduction, and I really think it's something people don't focus on enough. And one of the last considerations, or not the last, is that the changes are so dramatic that, you know, everything you did last year to be successful is like shockingly different from what you do this year. And it's really scary because we see people with like really successful, cool games, and they kind of build, you know, a better game next year, but based on the same mold. Not necessarily number two, just, you know, sort of similar approach to building games, similar approach to monetization, similar approach to, you know, distribution, viral distribution, and they completely fail the year after. And it's, again, it's this scary thing where, you know, the fortunes of developers are extremely fickle, because it's tough enough to be successful, but it seems to be almost tougher to be successful the second time than the first time, or at least not really equally. I don't know. It's hard to judge, and there's no data for this as far as I know. But everything indicates that you kind of have to reinvent yourself every year. The positive of that, and there's so much positive in this big kind of thing that's going on around us, is that for the newcomer, it's doable. And you're competing with guys who have a lot of money and have made successes, but, you know, they don't have that much on you. And if you're lucky, they're going to try to repeat their successes of yesteryear, and they're going to fail. Whereas you coming in with a new approach and freshness actually have at least as good a chance. I know at scale it can feel like a lottery to be successful, and I guess it is to some level. But following some of these kind of principles, we see people being very successful, even without a lot of resources and all these things. And this is actually kind of not maybe the right thing to put in here, because it's true this year, not last year, whereas everything else I said was, I think, pretty sort of, obviously, consistently true, fundamentally true. But, just something we noted is that whereas, we moved from one type of business that everyone had to do, sell their apps at $5, then it was $1, then it was $0 with ads, then it was free to play. Now we actually see finally, for such a fresh breath, a divergence of business models where people are successful with different ones. Which is maybe not so strange because there's so ridiculously many players playing these games, and there's such different tastes that even relatively niche things can do well. Which is the nature of really large, healthy market, which mobile gaming is today. One of the last things is to go local. It's so easy to fall into this idea that these are global markets, and it just turns out there's a lot of things that can happen if you think about specific markets. We've started trying to bring games, for instance, from the West to China, but have a whole team there where we actually will localize them, change the payment systems, change the business model, even take premium apps and turn them into kind of DLC-based apps and things like that. So there's a lot of things that can be done there. There's a lot of publishers out there who will help you publish your games in Latin America, in Korea, Japan, and so on and so forth. And again, it's not every game has a home in every country, but by looking around and absorbing the opportunities and spending just a little bit of time actually talking to these publishers and getting them to teach you what they know about their markets, there are some pretty amazing things that can happen. Whereas where people can have these kind of nice, sparky upsides without really putting in a lot of extra effort. So that's almost everything. The final point is really just to go nuts, because velocity is so important and doing it is so important. And having a project that you start now and are going to deliver in a year and a half means that you're probably making some pretty fundamentally wrong decisions about how you're going to shape it, design it. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't work for a while, but like every project has to kind of keep that openness as it goes, because there's changes at a speed that we've just never seen before in the industry. So that's my 7 or 8 points. And then I've been told we have a mic and we can do questions.